Welcome back. All right, 1981, all the way back. First year I watched hockey, 1980-81 being the season that I started really following things. And so the 1981 draft. The first time I'd heard about a number one draft pick and how awesome they could be, and it was Dale Hawerchuk. Dale Hawerchuk drafted first by the Winnipeg Jets, played 1,188 games in the NHL, and he was pretty darn good. So in the redraft, this is going to be an interesting one, isn't it? Now, number two on the original draft was Doug Smith by the LA Kings. He played 535 games in the NHL, not a bad career. Not in the redraft though. So, number one, and again looking through the entire draft and everything, I'm going to leave number one as it is. I and this is the funny thing is I thought I had done this one before, but looking over the channel over and over and over again, I can't find any instance where I've done this draft, so here we are. Dale Hawerchuk stays at number one. I can't make an argument against Dale Hawerchuk being number one. I could try, but it's not going to happen. Hawerchuk, one of the all-time greats, Hall of Famer, all of that, and I wouldn't think about having him anywhere other than first in this draft. That being said, number two in this draft, moving up from number 40, going to the LA Kings. Another Hall of Famer, Chris Chelios. This is a pretty good draft. So when I pick them for redrafts, if they're this old, it's because there's some really good star power in it. And Chris Chelios, number 40 that year, yeah, Montreal did pretty well for themselves there. Chelios, of course, would go on to an amazing, long Hall of Fame career. Fantastic player in his own right. And so he ends up at number two in this redraft. Number three, and moving up from number four. So originally he was taken by the Whalers. Now I'm having him taken by the Kings. So instead of being taken at four, he's taken at three, and that's Ron Francis. Ron Francis, the current general manager of the Seattle Kraken. If you didn't get to see him play, he was pretty special. He had, and he had the distinction too of going to the Pittsburgh Penguins and helping them become back-to-back champions as well. The addition of Ron Francis, famously, is a big part of the reason why the trade deadline is such a big deal now. Butch Goring being the first time that there was a big trade around the trade deadline that seemed to spur a team to, well, dynasty status really for the Islanders with 4 straight cups. But Francis going to Pittsburgh, that was seen as a great trade deadline deal, and from that day until now, trade deadline's been taken really seriously, and Pittsburgh set a precedent. So other GMs are like, hey, we can do the right thing at the deadline and add exactly what we need, right? It hasn't always worked out. All right, number 4. Can't have him any lower than 4. And originally he was drafted 15th. So what's interesting is in this one, a lot of them are first rounders that end up being on this board. Number 15 originally was Al MacInnis. I'm sending him to Hartford instead. Anybody who watched Al MacInnis knows he had one of the hardest slap shots in the history of the game. Absolutely fantastic defenseman. Played for a ton of time in Calgary, and then he went on and had a nice run in St. Louis as well. And so, yeah, MacInnis, you could put this top 4 in almost any order. You really could. You can make an argument for MacInnis at 1, Chelios at 1, Francis at 1, or Hawerchuk. So I felt like Hawerchuk stays with the Jets in my redraft, and the other 3 Hall of Famers, I'll settle it out when I'm doing the video. So here I am, settling it out while I'm doing the video. I'm going, yeah, I'd probably take Chelios, Francis, and then MacInnis, but there isn't really a wrong answer when you're picking between these 4 guys. So once you get past those 4, the superstar power of this draft kind of falls off at least a little bit. But at number 5, moving up from number 8. So Grant Fir was one of the most debated players during his time. Was he really that good, or did he just play behind the Oilers? And that was a conversation during the 80s. Now, in this redraft, I have him going to the Colorado Rockies. That will hurt his stats. The Colorado Rockies were not a well-run team. They originally drafted Joe Cirella, who went on to have a really good career. Not as a Rocky because, they were moved. They ended up in New Jersey. But he played 828 games in the NHL. I'd also point out that number 3 on this board is Bobby Carpenter, who played 1,178 games in the National Hockey League. Just double checking to be sure. Yep, he's there. He's on the list. But yeah, Grant Fir ends up at number 5 because he was one of the best goalies of his generation, but easily one of the most debated. about whether he was that good or it was just he's in Edmonton and he just has to make sure he doesn't allow more than 4 goals a game. So either way, you guys can let me know your thoughts. Number 6, going to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Another goaltender. Moving up from number 72. I always consider it like a minor victory when I remember how to spell Van Beesbroek. But he moves up from 72 to number 6 to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Man, if Toronto had Van Beesbroek. They had Bester, they had various others, Reget. They had some good goaltenders, but if they'd had Van Beesbroek, things could have been pretty good for Toronto in the 80s. Originally, they drafted Jim Benning, who played 610 games, and I considered whether or not he'd end up in the first round of this. He didn't. But Jim Benning was a decent defenseman for a large stretch of his career. It's the same Jim Benning. But John Van Beesbroek moves up to number 6. Again, this is a pretty stacked draft at the top of it. And so, yeah, I'm going to put Van Beesbroek there. Now, what's interesting is Van Beesbroek's not in the Hall of Fame, but the goaltender is going at number 7 is, because I would put him just a little bit ahead of this goaltender in terms of overall career. Mike Vernon goes number 7 to the Montreal Canadiens. So Montreal, of course, known for drafting pretty good goaltenders. Carey Price, Jose Theodore, Patrick Roy. But yeah, Mark Hunter was the original number 7 draft pick. He played 628 NHL games. He may very well end up in this first round as well. Once we got down into this range here, I was trying to go through and go, okay, which one would I pick? And so there's a couple extra names on the sheet here. But yeah, Mike Vernon moves up to number 7 to be taken by Montreal, which would definitely make Flames fans say no. If you were around back then, your answer to that would probably be no. So next up, and now we're into the players who aren't quite, superstar players, but can be. So moving down from number 3, played 1,178 games in the NHL. I'm 99% sure I've done a career video on Bobby Carpenter, because he was a player that I did like a lot. He drops from number 3 to number 8. He goes to the Oilers. So Bobby Carpenter did have a 50-goal season. If he'd played in Edmonton, if he played with Gretzky, he might have had more than one 50-goal season. Might have had a couple. Just going out on a limb and saying he might have had a couple. Hard not to score 50 goals playing with Gretzky would be my guess back then. But Bobby Carpenter ends up dropping down to from number 3 to number 8. But still, considering how stacked this draft is, I don't think that'll upset him. Also, because he's not going to watch this video, so it won't upset him anyways. Number 9 on the board. Now, originally it's James Patrick. And James Patrick is definitely in the running for potentially still being taken at 9. I'm just looking over the list to see if anybody would bump him out of 9th spot. And I don't think so. So James Patrick stays at 9. Still ends up going to the New York Rangers. Really excellent defenseman, staying in the same spot. James Patrick. I apologize. It's not as creative as I could be, but I can't make an argument for Patrick not being at 9th. I mean, I could have had him at 8th, going to Edmonton, and Bobby Carpenter going at 9th. Can go either way. If you want to do your redraft that way, go right on ahead. You just write this on your fridge and just, go that way and just, I'm doing a redraft, honey. Because your wife's going to ask, what are you doing? Doing a redraft. Why? Because I feel like it. But there's nobody here. Even better. Number 10. So, again, we're not in the superstar category at this point, but Garth Butcher was the original pick for the Vancouver Canucks. I feel sad not taking him there. Considering the peak, though, for Gerard Gallant as a player, and Gerard Gallant as a player, he was tough as nails. He was originally drafted 107th overall. I'm going to have him going number 10 to Vancouver. So, sorry, Detroit fans. I've taken Gerard Gallant away from you. And apologies to Garth Butcher. Garth Butcher gave everything he had to the Vancouver Canucks, and then they traded him. I swear, they wore him out, and then they're like, all right, well, kind of move you now. It just, I felt bad for Butcher, because he was on some pretty bad Vancouver teams, and just when they were ready to get better, he was traded away. Nice long career, though, 897 games for Butcher. For Gerard Gallant, he played a ton of games as well. And yeah, ends up number 10 in my redraft. Number 11. So at 11, moving up from number 108, these guys were drafted back to back originally. Why would I even consider splitting them up? Yeah, I know. I've got an eraser right here. I'm just used to doing it with my with my finger instead. I apologize. Because there are people who see that and go, wait, why is he racing with his finger? Usually it's easier than that, but the black marker's not so much. Bruce Driver moves up from 108th to 11th on this redraft. So Randy Moeller was originally drafted 11th. 815 games played for Moeller. Interesting story with Moeller. What I remember with him was when I got my 82-83 O-Pee-Chee hockey cards, that was the first card I pulled out of a pack. So I tracked him after that because it was like, that was kind of a standard at the time. The first hockey card I ever had was Ivan Boldarev. First time I opened a pack, and it was one of those painted on cards too. So I did tend to remember that for the first few years I was collecting cards. But yeah, Randy Moeller, pretty good all around player, but I would take Bruce Driver. Bruce Driver, longer career and good offensive defenseman as well for the New Jersey Devils. So apologies to New Jersey. He's off to Quebec. Hopefully you guys are okay with that. Moving on to the next one. Okay, originally taken at 12 and still taken at 12. Man, I've got to get more creative with this. But I can't make a cogent argument for why Tony Tanti should be higher than 12, and I also can't make a cogent argument for why he should be lower than 12. So Tony Tanti, who's more famous for being a Vancouver Canuck, originally drafted by the Blackhawks, and when they traded him to Vancouver, that was a trade that worked out pretty well for Vancouver. Although Chicago, I think, was happy with Kurt Fraser. Kurt Fraser got hurt a lot, and Tony Tanti went on to multiple 40-goal seasons with a Canucks team that was not known for 40-goal scorers at the time. All right, so next on the board, see, I kind of want to go to Gaetan Duchesne, but Gaetan Duchesne, while he played forever in the NHL, he wasn't really an offensive player on A level. Very good defensive player, though. But I'm going to go with, moving up from number 145. So originally drafted 145th overall, Tom Kurvers. Kurvers ended up having a nice journeyman career. He was a very good offensive defenseman. He could be suspect defensively, absolutely. I remember that being a talking point when he was with the Canucks. But he had a good career. He played a long time, and he moves up to number 13 on the redraft from number 145. So sadly, he passed a couple years back, but yeah, Tom Kurvers will always be remembered. He's built himself quite the legacy post-hockey, like post-playing career, so good on him for being able to do that. That's important, to be remembered after, especially if it's not necessarily just for your playing career. All right, number 14. This is kind of a tough one. Because again, I'm trying to figure out, do I want to go with the longer career or do I want to go with... But I'm going to go with moving up from 157th. Look at that. Another Canuck. 2 Canucks out of 3 picks. Petri Skriko was originally picked 157th overall by the Canucks, proving every now and then they'll get it right at the draft table. So Petri Skriko at 157th ends up moving up to 14th. He was a solid 30-goal scorer. He led the Canucks in scoring. I want to say there was 2 years he led the Canucks in scoring. It might have been 1. But he was a good forward. And again, during a time where the Canucks were bad, Petri Skriko never complained. There wasn't times that he was demanding trades. It was a pretty workman-like bunch they had there. Just they didn't have the talent to keep up with the Oilers and the Flames or anything like that. So, yeah, Petri Skriko moves up. So, next to Petri Skriko, or you're going to lose your place. Next up, going 15. You know what? Now, hopefully this doesn't enrage Garth Butcher if he sees this. Again, I have no reason to think he would. But Garth Butcher drops from 10 to 15 on this list. Butcher had a good, solid career with Vancouver and did continue after playing in Vancouver. I thought that at one point in time, Vancouver was playing Lidster and Butcher. It felt like 30 minutes a game. It felt like they were always out there. And keep in mind, this is when you're in the 80s and defense was what is defense. So I can't imagine how exhausted he was every given night. Butcher had a lot of heart. He had a lot of heart, and he was willing to drop the gloves. He wasn't always the biggest player in the fight, but he could win them as well. Didn't win every one, but who does? Okay, Bob Probert. But other than that, who does? All right. Moving on to number 16 on the board. And at 16th. So this is kind of funny. This is kind of funny because this is not the same Steve Smith. There were two Steve Smiths. So Philadelphia originally drafts I believe, forward named Steve Smith, who played 18 games in the NHL. In this redraft, I'm having them draft the Steve Smith that would play for Edmonton and was drafted 111th overall. So Smith had a decent career as a mostly defensive defenseman, had some offensive upside too. He is most remembered, of course, for the own goal in that series against Calgary, which is too bad because Smith was a decent defenseman in his own right. May at times have been overrated because he played for the Oilers in the 80s, and that was a team of just gods among men. But yeah, Smith, I think at 16 going to Philadelphia, it's a happy accident. He ends up going in place of the other Steve Smith. Got confusing. Steve Smith number 1, Steve Smith number 2. It's like we had two Greg Adams in Vancouver, so one became Gus and the other one became Greg C. And it was like, well, why does he need the Greg C if the other one's Gus? Just have Gus and Greg. All right, number 17. Yeah, this is kind of a tough one. You know what? Going 17 to the Buffalo Sabres. Gaetan Duchesne. Gaetan Duchesne was originally drafted 152nd overall. He played for a very long time in the NHL. He was a good defensive forward in an era where we did not have a ton of really good defensive forwards. Defense was not really being preached during the 80s. But Gaetan Duchesne played for a long time. He was one of my favorite players. I know that I have a reputation for liking third and fourth liners a lot, and it confuses people. But again, and I've said this before, I appreciate the guys who aren't like the supremely talented, aren't making millions and millions upon millions, and go out there and do their job every night. And I think it's interesting too that a guy like Gaetan Duchesne will go out there and shut down the guy who's making $8 million a year, and still he won't get paid nearly as much. But without his role, you may not have won that game without him shutting down that $8 million player. But that's a whole other debate for a whole other time. All right, at 18, moving up from 196th overall. Originally drafted, I do believe it was Pittsburgh that drafted Dave Hannon. Because I know he played for the Pittsburgh Penguins to start out. Doesn't always mean that the guy was drafted by the team that he played for. But yeah, Dave Hannon, originally drafted 196, moves up to 18th. So Montreal, Mike Vernon, Dave Hannon, not too bad of a draft. Now we've got Montreal again. So if Montreal just drafts Dave Hannon, who again was a forward, in the next spot, draft a defenseman. Joe Cirella goes from number 5 down to number 19 to the Montreal Canadiens. So they draft a goaltender, a defenseman, and forward. And that defenseman, Joe Cirella, played 828 games in the NHL. Not a player who was flashy on any level, but he was a good defensive defenseman. And I do remember him playing for the Quebec Nordiques. He played for Quebec. I know he played for New Jersey after the move from Colorado. And I know he played for the He played for the Rangers as well, right? Anyways, my memory's not quite what it was. I think he was with those 3 teams, but there might have been others in there. I don't think so. But anyways, all right. Joe Cirella. Next up, at number 20 originally, Marty Ruff was drafted by St. Louis. He didn't play any games in the NHL. Yuri Dudacek, drafted here by Buffalo. Nope. And Jan Ingman, drafted here by Montreal. Also a nope. Outside of that, almost everybody played. One pick I want to talk about here too. Number 14, Norman Levier, who was drafted by the Boston Bruins, had a very promising career that was sadly cut short. One of the first times that I really I realized that careers can be extremely short. Levier being the one. That was way back. I'm trying to remember anyways. That was before I was a Boston fan, but I was sort of Boston adjacent in my fandom. Whole other topic. Number 20 on this board is going to be originally drafted 22nd, so he's only moving up a couple of spots. But in this era, 22nd is not first round. Isn't that interesting? Used to be 21 picks in the first round. So you wouldn't have the same expectation of a player because they were taken in the second round. And now that would be a first round position. So just one of those interesting things about how the change is because there's more teams. So there's more first round draft picks. And I think there's more pressure on prospects now than there might have been back in the 80s. Also, we didn't really care nearly as much as people do now. Number 21. So I've got 3 names here. I've got Paul McDermott, Randy Moller, and Mark Hunter. Mark Hunter, decent forward. Paul McDermott could do a little bit of everything. Some toughness there too. I'm going to go with Randy Moller. Color guy now on Florida broadcasts. And pretty tough defenseman in his own right. 815 games played. Originally drafted by the Quebec Nordiques. This thing here. And Randy Moller played for the Rangers as well. So a couple of Rangers defensemen on the board here in the first round. But yeah, I'm happy with Moller at 11. And I think this draft is pretty close to stacked. And yes, I don't have a Colorado Rockies magnet that looks better than that. That's what I have. They don't make Rockies magnets, and if they did, they'd be for baseball, because now baseball has the Colorado Rockies, which I thought was rude. I was like, if they ever get a team back, it'd be great if they were the Colorado Rockies again. Oh, the baseball team's well, that's stupid. Anyways, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event that you have not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.